And even mistakes get made. And one of the things that I've learned is it's better to say, okay, what do we learn from it? Let's move forward. I trust you. You're going to make a good decision in the future. We all make mistakes, right? If you empower that team around you and support them, you get so much more done. And I'm blessed to have fantastic people working with me. I tell everybody I've got the best staff in Washington, and I do. And the key, though, is to turn them loose, empower them, make sure we're all aligned in the goal and the purpose.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to Catalysts for Change, the show where we explore the stories, strategies, and turning points of leaders driving meaningful impact in their communities and across the country. I'm Adam Lister, and I'm so glad you're here. Today's guest is a political leader and movement builder whose career has shaped the direction of conservative policy for more than 4 decades. David McIntosh is the president of the Club for Growth, the influential political organization dedicated to advancing economic freedom, limited government, and pro-growth policies. Before leading the club, David co-founded the Federalist Society. As a law student, served in the Reagan and George H.W. Bush administrations and represented Indiana's 2nd District in college, where he authored the Congressional Review Act, a law that is still in use today. As a candidate for governor in Indiana, he gained experience that gave him hard lessons in balancing principle and pragmatism. At every step in his career, David has built institutions, nurtured networks, and mastered the processes that translate ideas into lasting impact. And he's a reminder that institutions outlast individuals, that networks are the true currency of influence, and that strategy requires both procedural mastery and principled pragmatism. In today's episode, we'll talk about his journey from student activist to national leader, how he has navigated divided government and a changing conservative movement, and the leadership lessons he believes the next generation must carry forward. Let's dive in. David, thank you for being here today. It's good to see you.
Good to see you. Thank you, Adam.
I know you have got a lot that comes across your plate on any given day, and it can be sometimes hard to think back to simpler times when your phone isn't ringing every 5 seconds, when text messages and emails aren't coming in. But I'd love to start our conversation today by going back to the beginning, before you were in Congress, before the Club for Growth. You were a student that was helping to launch what would become one of the most influential legal institutions in the country. Could you tell me and the guests a little bit about the Federalist Society and particularly why you helped to launch it, what it was trying to solve?
Yeah. So in law school, I realized, and several of my friends who had been part of a conservative student group, that the dominant thesis in American law at that point was very much on the left and actually trending to a socialist version of the law. And they no longer believed that the law was something that could be established and neutral principles for people to resolve disputes, to clarify rights that we have. The left believed law was an instrument of politics, and that judges should employ the law. Particularly Supreme Court justices should make up new laws that conformed with their view of what the right policy should be. So we started the Federalist Society. It started out as actually chapters on law school where we'd grab pizza and have lunch together, invite a speaker to come. And a couple years into law school, one of my closest friends from college, Steve Calabrese, asked me and Lee Liberman Otis, why don't we do a conference at Yale? And Reagan had just gotten elected president. Let's invite all the conservative scholars around the country to come, and we'll debate the issues that are of today. Particularly, federalism was on the table a lot with President Reagan having been a former governor. And so we organized that at Yale. There weren't a lot of conservative professors around the country. And we had it was then Professor Scalia, but Justice Scalia, Judge Bork came, a lot of the folks from the Reagan Justice Department. And we had a debate on issues of the day. And one of the things we decided was debate is a way of persuading people or informing people about a conservative view that's deeply in the minority. So we invited liberals to come and present their views as well. Libertarian conservative, more constitutional conservatives, more traditional value conservatives. And that almost by accident launched the whole thing. We got letters. At the time, you didn't have cell phones, didn't have internet. And we advertised in National Review about the conference and said, we'll pay travel subsidy for students who want to come. And ended up having about 70 students from around the country. Then Professor Scalia put us in contact with Spencer Abraham at Harvard, some students at Stanford, and we, all of us collectively set up this conference. But I got a lot of letters that said, how can we form a chapter at our law school? We need this here. And I remember the night before the conference, staying up all night, typing up how to form a Federalist Society chapter. Now, at the time, we hadn't decided on that name. I call it a Madisonian moment where compromise leads to a good thing. Steve Calabrese really wanted to call it the Federalist Society. Spence Abraham, who'd been out of law school a couple of years, had some funding and was helping us, wanted to call it the Society for Policy Studies. And we ended up compromising, calling the official name still is the Federalist Society for Law and Public Policy. And of course, it gets abbreviated down to the Federalist Society. But that let us all work together. We decided we want to avoid politics inside the organization. So we set up a board of the original founders that guided it for probably the next 10, 15 years. After we graduated, we all missed the fun times with the student projects, so we set up an office in Washington, D.C., hired Eugene Meyer, our first president, and I remember I was working for a law firm out in Los Angeles at the time. I remember becoming kind of an itinerant preacher that went from law campus to law campus, sleeping on somebody's couch, talking to the students there. You can set up a Federalist Society chapter. Here's how you do it. Over the years, it grew in influence, particularly with President Reagan and Attorney General Meese. They hired a lot of members of the Federalist Society, encouraged us to build it out. And during President Bush and both Bush's tenure, they looked for Federalist Society types to staff their Justice Department because they knew they shared those conservative principles. The key was, so base it on the principle that the law is not the same as politics, and that it's the duty of judges to interpret the law, not to make up laws. And that guiding principle let us set up programs in a lot of different areas. We kept the principle of debate and also the principle we wouldn't advocate. We didn't ever enter into cases. We didn't advocate for Congress to pass bills, but we remained a debating society, continued to invite professors from the left to have that debate, which made it a lot more interesting, Adam. You know, if you've got people on opposite sides sparring with each other, and those professors really liked it too. It was interesting for them because they had a colleague in the academic world that they admired debating with them about their ideas. And so when the Clinton administration, Hillary decided to turn on the Federalist Society. She thought it was part of the vast right-wing conspiracy. And a lot of these liberal professors stood up and said, no, it's a good group. They debate. They invite us to debate. We shouldn't cancel them.
I think one of the things that strikes me about how this gets built and the organization that you are leading today that gets lost on a lot of nonprofit leaders or advocacy leaders is how you build something that supports an idea while also thinking about institution building. You've got to build something that outlasts the moment, outlasts the person. And clearly that has happened at the Federalist Society. What did you learn in those early days, or what have you maybe learned now, having reflected back on it, about institutional building and institution building that has allowed you to continue to carry that forward in your day-to-day work now?
A couple lessons from the Federalist Society, and we've definitely carried it forward into the Club for Growth. And I look forward to sharing with you some of the networking institutions we're building there. But one was stay focused on the idea, the key principle that is the reason for your existence. Always have that as the first question you think about and talk about. For the Federalist Society, it was that we should preserve the rule of law. It's not the job of a judge to make up law. That's Congress and the president, but to interpret the law and apply it fairly. For the Club for Growth, it's the principle that free markets solve problems better than government. So we want economic freedom, we want limited constitutional structure in the government, all of which lead to that result. So every candidate we interview, and we spend a lot of money supporting them, we first determine, what do you believe in? And do you share our views on free market economics, limited government, pro-growth policies? So having that principle be your guide star is really very important. The second is incorporating social events. You know, I mentioned we all got together for lunch with pizza at the very beginning of the Federalist Society, but make it something that's fun and people meet each other, become friends, share ideas. And you see it in both organizations where longtime members, they come and tell me, oh, David, it's not just that we're a member of the Federalist Society. These folks are family friends. We share where we're going on vacation. We tell each other about our kids and what they're doing. And they take ownership of the cause and really the organization over time. And so I think that social aspect builds that feeling of loyalty and participation and ownership of the cause.
That makes a lot of sense. And you said something about the candidate recruitment that really resonates with me too, David, is, and maybe this is just, because I heard this often as an advocate and someone that was engaged in political races, that this suggestion that lawmakers are paid for by entities. And we would regularly seek to correct the record. It was like, how dare you think such little thoughts about the people that we're electing? What we do is we find the people that believe in what we believe in, and we are so confident in those beliefs that they resonate with the majority of voters. We just make sure that that message gets amplified, that we're not out there to change a candidate's mind. We're out there to amplify the candidate that already believes in the things that we believe in. And we also happen to believe that these things resonate with voters. And when you connect those two, you win an election if you do it well. And if you don't do it well, you don't win the election.
Right, right. And voters are, sometimes politicians look down on them, figure we can sell them anything. They're actually very shrewd, very understanding, and can detect if somebody's not genuine. If they're simply mouthing the words, oh, I'll be for tax cuts, but they don't really believe it. And one of the things we do now at the Club for Growth, and we've grown into the largest Republican super PAC, independent super PAC, and we're focused on candidates that share that limited government, free market view. And we interview 300 candidates every cycle, pick about 35 to 40 that we endorse and support, and then put resources behind them. But you'd be surprised how many of them come in and tell me, oh yeah, David, I would never vote for a tax increase, never. And then we also have a research arm. So we go back and we look at their record on city council or state legislature. And sure enough, they voted for 5 different tax increases. And so you trust but verify was Reagan's way of putting it. We interview them. We welcome people here to the club, but we really do a lot of due diligence to figure out what makes them tick. And I think the voters appreciate that, because what I've seen is once we introduce a lot of our candidates and who they are, because voters tend to not know somebody who's new in the political scene, and we introduce them, we draw the distinction between them and their opponents. They really embrace them and are very successful at building loyal enthusiasts that help them do the job.
Yeah, I totally agree. You mentioned President Reagan a couple of times and Ed Meese. I'd love to go back to that point in time in your life. You joined the administration under Ed Meese, the 75th Attorney General of the United States, and later joined Vice President Quayle's Competitiveness Council. These were high-pressure roles. particularly for a young professional, but they're also, and we're also, real laboratories for change. What I'm curious to know is that in any institution, it can be hampered and progress can be hampered without effective leadership around the mission and around the organization. And it can be easy to spot good examples of that in the private sector. What does it look like in the public and advocacy space to build effective movement leadership inside those spaces, inside government? How do you recognize that? How do you identify those items?
So, a couple different things. First, you want to work for somebody who has integrity and shares your views, right? Ronald Reagan is my favorite president. He was very much committed to his mission as president of turning the ship of state around, and reinforcing the Constitution and the role of the government internationally, but also pulling government back so that the private sector could prosper and innovate. So he shared the basic views. And Ed Meese is one of the most honorable men that I've ever met. And he also shared those views. He let us go and be his eyes and ears. I was what was called a special assistant, which means you're not really in the line of authority. You're an aide de camp to the attorney general, and you're his eyes and ears around the department. And also, he liked having young people who had these ideas. He loved the Federalist Society, and he wanted us to be kind of the promoters for change. One of the issues that isn't a Club for Growth issue, but was a big issue for us there, was filing a brief to overturn Roe versus Wade. In the conservative movement, that's been a decades-long progress. And the gentleman who was Solicitor General, Paul Freed, didn't want to do it. He didn't think the court was ready and resisted that idea. But Ed let those of us younger cohorts, perhaps you could say we didn't know what we didn't know, right? We thought all things were possible. And so let's fight for this and try to get it done. And eventually corralled everybody in the department and the attorney general to tell the Solicitor General, go ahead and file that brief. But he relied on that energy that came from the youthful vigor. You have to be loyal to those that you're working to and understand how far you can take something. But you want to work for someone who encourages you to be entrepreneurial inside the government. Work to promote the policies that the Attorney General in this case has told the American people he stands for and the president stands for.
Many of us have been in rooms before where the person with the most impressive title may hold the least amount of real power. Can you think about a moment where, or reflect on a story where the strength of your network or someone else's network mattered more than formal authority to help advance your mission?
Oh, that's a great question. I think in the case of promoting a lot of the constitutional principles in President Trump's first administration, he relied on the Federalist Society. And when members of the society said, here's the right direction for limiting government, and more recently for filing different positions in the Supreme Court, I think that network then carries a lot of weight because the president or elected officials in Congress recognize they're not speaking just from the viewpoint of a Washington lobbyist. They're speaking from a broad, 30,000 some members around the country who think like that. And so if they're saying it's important, it's going to be important to them. At the club, we leverage that, our membership and the fact that we've supported a lot of people who are now in Congress on usually one or two issues at a time. We don't have a broad bandwidth of lobbyists and other people, but every time a tax bill comes up, that becomes our number one focus. Last year, when they were passing the One Big Beautiful Bill, we had actually prepared a year in advance a study that showed which tax changes would do the most to promote growth, One of them was immediate expensing if you build a new factory. We marketed that with candidates, and then we marketed the study with the Treasury Department and the members of Congress. In fact, even before they were in the majority, we were meeting with Jason Smith, who was going to become the chairman of Ways and Means Committee, and his staff, laying out the parts of that bill that we thought were most important. And then when it came around to it, we paid for different advocacy, ads and so forth, telling the members how important that was, helped them make sure we had all the Republicans because we had a very narrow majority. But that focus we're able to bring about and people pay attention to because we've got 500,000 members around the country, and we've got several dozen members of Congress, 10, 15 members of the Senate that are, I was going to say loyal to the club. They're really loyal to the ideas, and we help them get elected, so they trust us when we bring an idea to them.
You ran for Congress in the mid 90s during Newt Gingrich's Republican Revolution. And within, I think, about 2 years, you found yourself in a position where you were the architect of the Congressional Review Act, which is still in use today. Walk us through the CRA's story. How did it happen? Why was it necessary? And how did you build and sustain the energy to push that through in the face of a political ecosystem that was trying to kill it?
One of the great things was that Newt Gingrich, as the new speaker, was open to new ideas. And he also wanted to encourage the freshmen to really seize the moment and become energized. And politically, he realized 75 members of his caucus were in this freshman class that liked each other, worked together, was a big component of his speakership. So that gave me an advantage. My previous work with Dan Quayle on the Competitiveness Council, we had reviewed every regulation under Bush Sr.'s administration. So I knew the regulatory process. And I also knew somewhat how Congress worked from watching it from the executive branch, which gave me a leg up as a freshman member. And Newt actually made me and one other member chairman of a subcommittee. Mine was on regulations again. So the bill started as a pretty comprehensive regulatory relief, making it harder for agencies to write regulations that went beyond what the statute and Congress authorized. A lot of checks and balances in it. And the House was interested in it, but the Senate, and Don Nichols was the lead on this, only could do so much. And Don set me down and said, "You're new, but trust me, I'm in leadership. We can get some of this done, but not all of it. So here's the version that I think we can get done." And that was the Congressional Review Act. And so I took that back to the House. Folks agreed. Newt agreed to it. Don worked it in the Senate. And in the end, Adam, we decided the best way to get this through was actually to attach it to a must-pass bill. And so one day Newt called me up and said, "Hey, we're about to pass the debt ceiling increase. That can be controversial with you young conservatives. What do you think, David, if we added your Congressional Review Act to that?" I jumped at it. I realized that was the way we could get it done. I talked to Senator Nichols. He agreed with it, greased the skids over on the Senate side. And so at the last minute, that got attached to the debt ceiling increase, which President Clinton definitely wanted, right? He'd been lobbying Congress to do this for a long time. So they looked at the title and said, "Oh, okay, doesn't matter." There's a very famous Washington Post article the day after he signed that bill where his senior staff read the bill and said, "Uh-oh, what have we done here?" Because it gives Congress leverage over the agencies and what they're doing in their regulation. Turns out it's most effective when you have a change of presidency, because the way it's structured, Congress still has to pass a bill. We just created expedited, you only need 50 votes. You only need 50 senators, not 60. So you could get things done quickly, but the president could still veto it. So that gave the White House leverage. So what happened, like when President Trump was inaugurated and Joe Biden had put in a bunch of very onerous regulations, immediately the Republicans in Congress sorted through those, started putting through resolutions to use the Congressional Review Act. Someone told me that President Trump has signed 15 of those in this term, and that's more than all other presidents had signed in the past.
Wow.
So it's definitely started to become a tool that people use to fight back at the regulatory system.
You know, I think there are a lot of the folks that listen to this podcast are adjacent to advocacy, maybe politics, but I would argue most Americans probably struggle either emotionally because they're frustrated or for a variety of other reasons, time constraints, to understand how you balance principle and pragmatism in these battles, and why mastering process could sometimes be just as or more important as mastering policy. What's your perspective on that? Because as I'm thinking about your story with Speaker Gingrich and how you attach this bill, you've got to go back and sell it to your caucus as well. How do you think about balancing principle with pragmatism, and where does policy versus process fall into that for you?
Yeah, and I would add a third component, Adam, and that is communicating back to your constituents, or basically marketing it with the public. Because in our system, it's intentionally built in with roadblocks, right? You've got to pass two bodies, the House and the Senate. The president has to sign on to the bill. And within that, you've got committee structures, division of power. That is a beautiful thing. It has secured our freedom more than even the Bill of Rights and those things. But it can be really frustrating. I remember as a House member, I would chafe and complain about the U.S. Senate because it took longer. It was hard. You had to get 60 votes for most things. But when I stepped back and wore my Federalist Society hat, I'm saying, okay, that's the way the system's supposed to work. So what I did was say to myself, okay, it's going to be hard. I've got a lot of roadblocks. We used to have a mantra in my office. If you don't ask, the answer is no. So start asking people to work with you and support what you're doing. And and then the other one that I now have is no means not yet. And so don't get stymied when you get some no's. Figure out what the concern is, find a way to work with that, incorporate it. And sometimes people will just change their mind when they see that you're sincere and working hard. And there's a lot of trust that goes to it too. That, again, that social principle. I tried to get to know all the members of my class and a lot of the more senior members, so they knew who I was, knew what I was about, what I was doing. They knew that when I told them something, they could trust it. And that truth, by the way, is a key principle to success in all of this. Telling the truth to the public reveals where there's problems. Telling the truth to your colleagues and people around you builds that trust. Sometimes it's hard, right? Because some things that are true are problems for you. Yeah, but you have to acknowledge them and work with that to get something done. And then as you go, you're not going to get your original idea 100% the way you wrote it. So you have to, don't have an ego, don't have a pride of authorship to it. Bring people into it. Another bill that I worked on was eliminating the marriage penalty, but I wasn't on the committee. One of my classmates, Jerry Weller, was on the committee. So it became Jerry's bill. And he and I worked together on it. We shared everything, but I knew he'd get top billing. But I wanted the bill passed and said, okay, let's do it that way. So share it, credit with other people, take responsibility when something doesn't work, and then people will look up to you because they know you're not going to duck responsibility. And then just realize it's going to take time to build all of that, and our process is intentionally slow. I guess a final point is know the system and know the dynamic to know when an opportunity comes up. That debt ceiling bill that I mentioned, that was an opportunity that we hadn't planned on at the beginning. But when it came up and the opportunity to add the bill to it came up, we seized it and we ran with the opportunity when we saw it. So part of it is understand how the system works, understand the people who are in it, build a team around you, because no one person has all the talents that you need to get this done, and then just put in the sweat to achieve things and move the ball and get things done. I end up being a little stubborn, so if I get a no, it's okay, not right now, but I'm going to come back and talk to you more about it, and politely share that with people. Right? I acknowledge what you're telling me, but I still want an opportunity to persuade you. I also like winning, so
I
it
I
motivates
always
me.
always assumed that the reason I got a no was just because I asked the question inartfully.
Uh,
That I need to think about, okay, they answered the question I gave them. I just asked a bad question. I need to
yeah.
give a better question that allows them to say yes. But thinking about your opportunities, we had a very similar situation in Tennessee just a few years ago coming out of COVID. Many students were behind and had lost significant ground in reading and in literacy. And there had been a multi-years effort to try to improve these student outcomes. And we were seeing some growth. It was going in the right direction. But following that opportunity, the governor calls a special session. We were able to pass some legislation that had some really rigorous accountability measures, some support systems to drive investments in literacy and improve the ways in which schools were giving and promoting reading instruction to students. Just last week, it was announced Tennessee is #1 in the Southeast in reading, and these are things that don't happen by accident. We would have eventually gotten there, but it probably would have taken less or taken more time than it did here. But you see an opportunity coming out of this. There's an awareness with voters who are seeing their children struggle with these things on a regular basis, and like let's jump on this. Let's take care of this problem today.
Yeah, and it was great. Again, you noticed the opportunity. You saw it in education. We saw a similar thing after COVID because parents realized it's not working for my children a lot of times. And in our case, we'd always supported school choice, essentially letting the parents work with the public schools, but if they want to go to a private school or homeschool, have the resources to do that. And we also got that passed in Tennessee, which I think that competition motivates the public schools to perform even better. And so when you set the right standards that your bill did, and they've got this pressure from people can choose to be here or not, then you get a great outcome. That's I hadn't heard that about the ranking. That's fantastic.
I'll follow up and send you some exciting, some really exciting data points there that looks great nationally, but of course, when we think about the region in the Southeast, it's one of the best places to get an education now if you're a child in this region, particularly if you're a child that is struggling with disabilities or you're a family that doesn't have means. I took you all the way back to law school, and then we went a little bit further ahead to President Reagan's administration. I'd love to skip a little bit further now into the year 2000. You ran for governor of Indiana, and while it didn't go your way, you've said you learned as much from that loss as from any victory. I'm curious to know, what did that race teach you about how to translate big ideas into credibility at the voter level? And how do you then use that to help candidates and advocacy organizations balance fundraising, messaging, progress? As we talked about earlier, it takes longer. It doesn't happen overnight. What did that experience teach you, and how do you then leverage that knowledge today to help organizations succeed?
Yeah, a great question. So I had just spent 6 years in Congress, had moved up the ranks, had gotten a lot of favorable press back home in Indiana, and was recruited by the Republicans in the state legislature because we'd lost the governor's race 4 years before, and Governor Frank O'Bannon was up for reelection. Uh, I laid out a very ambitious plan to lower property taxes. We even printed buttons that we'd all wear about the lower how you'd lower it, and also reform state government. And we had a platform of creating an environment, a business environment in Indiana where students who typically would go to school there, but they'd leave for California or New York or Chicago for work. And we wanted to make Indiana an attractive place for them to stay and work, build a career, but also have a great family life. All of that was a very appealing agenda. What I found and learned on the campaign side was you have to also build trust first with the voters. My district trusted me and knew me, although I think they actually wanted me to stay in Congress. They were not that happy about letting me go. And Frank O'Bannon was an older, longtime political figure, had hired a bunch of fairly incompetent people, so the government had little problems around the edges but they trusted him and they liked him. Neither of us ran that negative a campaign, especially compared to today. And the voters really, in this case, decided, okay, we're not sure we trust this new guy, interesting ideas, but we're not ready to fire Frank. We're going to keep him on for 4 more years. And then 4 years later, Mitch Daniels picked up a lot of the same agenda, ran with it, and became a very successful governor in Indiana. I also learned some things as a candidate, how to be a better leader. One of them was I spent almost all my time raising money, which I do now, but I didn't spend enough time out actually meeting people and campaigning in that personal touch. And the second one I learned was, as a congressman, I didn't delegate very much at all. I was micromanaged. My chief of staff would come into me periodically, and he was a very good friend. And he'd say, "Okay, David, I think I'm going to go back to Indiana." "What? I don't want you to leave. You're doing a great job." "Well, you seem to be figuring things out. I heard you were ordering balloons for the reelection campaign." And I said, "Okay, I get your point. I'll stop being a micromanager." I took that lesson into the campaign and probably delegated too much. So there wasn't a feel on the ground of who I was. So you've got to stay involved to a large extent. Don't micromanage. Find good people to trust to run things, but have it reflect who you are. And then the third one I've carried with me ever since. After the election, after I lost, a young man from my district said, "Can I have lunch with you? I've studied leadership and I want to share some things." So we grabbed lunch. I think it was at a Cracker Barrel. And he laid out, there are 6 different styles of leadership. One of them is visionary leadership. You're very good at that. You cast a vision for people to see and grasp and follow. But another one you might think about, and he called it filial leadership. And it's where you lead a team by letting the team know you're going to take care of their interests, of their careers, of their ambitions as much as your own. And I realized I hadn't been that good of a leader in that factor, and I've tried to incorporate it in everything that I do since then.
Yeah, your point about delegation versus micromanaging, I can feel every hair on my body stand up because it's a constant balance. And you want to empower folks on your team. You also have rigorous expectations for the quality of the execution of the thing, and figuring out where your vision lands. Your balloon example is so good because you could probably make a sound argument as to why it was important for you to pick out those particular balloons, but there are probably 15 other arguments that would tell you you were wrong.
Right. And what's the best use of your time?
Exactly.
And are you really empowering your team? I mean, one of the things I do all the time now at Club for Growth is try to give ownership in the different department heads. They always come and confer with me, which I like and expect, and they show every ad to me, they show every poll to me, but they're the ones that have created it. And 8 times out of 10, I just sign off on it. So I know what's going on. Every once in a while, I'll add an observation from my experience. So I feel like I'm adding value to the good work that they're doing. But if you empower them and support them with the decisions they make, including, honestly, a bad decision. You don't want to, you want to support them in that and say, I understand it. You told me about it at the time. It made sense. It turned out it didn't work. That isn't necessarily a bad decision, a decision that didn't work. And even mistakes get made. And one of the things that I've learned is it's better to say, okay, what do we learn from it? Let's move forward. I trust you. You're going to make a good decision in the future. We all make mistakes, right? If you empower that team around you and support them, you get so much more done. And I'm blessed to have fantastic people working with me. I tell everybody I've got the best staff in Washington, and I do. And the key though is to turn them loose, empower them, make sure we're all aligned in the goal and the purpose.
Since 2015, skipping ahead still, you have led the Club for Growth. It has become one of the, if not the most influential organizations in America. You've grown it into a financial and ideological force. It has also grown and leveraged some real influence during really complex dynamics inside of American politics and the conservative movement. How have you managed those tensions between free market orthodoxy and modern era populism while also thinking about what your original vision was when you took over the organization in 2015?
Yeah, it's incredibly important to do. I've noticed groups that are ideologically based and rigid. We no compromise. We can't. This is our party line, and we're going to stick to it. And to the point where, particularly with President Trump, he will have a lot of different things that you could agree with, and we agree with almost all of them. Free trade's one we don't. But you realize we want to be partners in the political process. And so that means he's president, he's going to lead on that issue. We're going to work together on winning campaigns, and I'm going to support him on the 8 other things that we think are exactly right, like the tax bill. He's very supportive of school choice. And that creates a working coalition or working alliance. It lets you focus on what matters for you. And I think there are a couple of key elements to it. One, don't make enemies if you don't have to, right? In fact, someone you might have disagreed with in the past, where you find a point of agreement, reach out to them and create a bond based on that. So try to work with everybody, be part of a larger coalition. I'm very happy for us to. You were very kind in defining us as very important and influential, but I'm also happy to sit back and let other people be out front, take the credit for things, and I view our job is to help them succeed. And then I think a key one is to always tell the truth. If you can't be with them on something, tell them that. If they're asking why are you focusing on that, explain to it. But truth in all of this really creates a huge opportunity to be successful, be influential. We also view all of our donors as people that were custodians for what they want to accomplish in politics. And so when we have our big donor conference once a year, nice location in Florida, but as I explained to them, it's their Club for Growth. They're providing the resources and the support for us to be successful. And a lot of times they'll say to me, I don't want to just give to everybody, David, but I want my money to help Barry Moore, our current candidate we're supporting in Alabama. And so I tell them, look, every dollar you give us will go to help Barry Moore. We're going to earmark it, and I promise you that's how we use the money. Occasionally, Adam, I've found where, and Barry is going to do well and win, but we've had candidates in the past where we worked really hard, and became clear a month out, it's not working. And so I'll go back to the donor and say, I can keep spending the money there to help this candidate, but I don't think it's going to work. Do you want me to stop and I'll refund the money you gave me? And most of the times they say, no, I believe in it, keep going, but I appreciate you being honest with me, David. And so again, truth clears the way for avoiding misunderstandings and people wondering afterwards what we were doing. Um, One time the donor said, okay, stop doing that. Okay, I'll send the money back. Keep it. You can use it for the next project you're doing. So that trust and that faith in what we do built up a true relationship where, again, they feel they have ownership in the Club for Growth, and it's their club.
I think it's a really important way to think about stewarding donors as well. That you want to think about how to build a relationship with that donor, not just in the experience where they have that initial transaction and everything that leads up to that transaction, but how do you steward that relationship so that they, to your point, can have confidence that the investment was made wisely and that they feel good that the vision is aligned, the strategies are aligned, and we can continue to trust these people to your point, be good, to be good custodians of these dollars and really steward both the relationship and the investment to a place where it could have an impact. You, we talked a little bit about the pragmatism and the policy and moving things down the line. You've moved some of these big ideas from start to finish, both in divided government and then in these complex political times that we're in right now, both as a staffer, as a lawmaker, as the CEO of an advocacy organization. And to many, that can seem challenging when an average voter looks at government and sees gridlock and shutdowns or disagreements, or to your point, filibuster proof challenges. How do you think about when you are engaging in these issues, when to take the win and when to keep pushing? I've heard you say before, half a loaf is better than none. How do you balance that? And then what are the important levers in how you then communicate that to your constituencies?
It's a key question. You always have to keep that in mind, right? You have to acknowledge I'm not going to get 100% of what I started out wanting to do. Uh, and that half a loaf, it depends on what's in the half, right? Very much. Have you made progress? What I like to see is that we've laid the groundwork for coming back for the second half and making good arguments that it makes sense. Al Simpson was a senator when I was a freshman in '94, a long-time, well-respected senator from Wyoming. He and I teamed up on a bill, we called it Eliminating Welfare for Lobbyists. But essentially, if you were a not-for-profit and accepting money from the government, you couldn't hire lobbyists to lobby the government. The money is fungible. They didn't want the taxpayer money to be paying for these lobbyists. And we ran into a buzzsaw with it. As you might expect, there in Washington, there are a lot of powerful not-for-profits that lobby for their cause and for their money. I found out later that the Red Cross had a coalition that raised $20 million to stop our bill. But Al said to me one time, as we could see what was happening, David, we'll probably get something that may mean something, may not, as a compromise. You're going to have to decide, do you want to accept that? Or do you want to say no and come back and fight another day? And it was very wise advice to a young member who just thought we fight all the way through. And in that case, something was very much a shell, and he and I both decided, okay, we're not going to take that. We've been defeated. But the principle is laid out there. And you have to keep in mind, Adam, my faith is critical to everything I do. I've been blessed in my career. I can tell you the miracles that happened that let me go from somebody nobody thought could get elected to being a member of Congress. So I try to every day ask the Lord's blessing on what I do, but also ask for his guidance and wisdom in what I do. And I think that helps me discern what a good path is. I make mistakes. I don't mean to be claiming I'm somehow better than everybody else, but it gives me peace that I know, okay, if it didn't work, there's a larger plan at stake, and I'm going to submit to that plan.
David, you and the club have invested in mentoring, and you've talked a lot during this episode about helping people be successful, helping future generations and leaders be successful. As we close out today's conversation, how do you think young leaders should think about networks, not just as contacts, but as communities of trust? What are the most important levers as they build out their next 20 to 30 years and think about their futures?
We established a fellowship in our C3 where we recruit 50 young leaders who are not running for Congress to be part of it, and intentionally built in a networking. So we invite the alumni. There are about 300 of them now. They know each other. They've become really good friends, but they help each other with all of their projects across the country. So we've institutionalized that networking and mentoring process. I think the key way for younger folks to look at it is, first of all, this is an opportunity to learn and to help others and to leverage your own skills, to be a better person, a better leader. And when you're united with folks that you share the same principles, the same beliefs with, you're stronger and can do more and accomplish more. I also encourage them, as they mature through the system, look behind you. Look at some younger people that you might give a hand to, help them get a job, advance in their career, become leaders themselves. So pass it on, essentially, what you've got. And for me personally, when I took over the job, the building the club, winning races, promoting conservative ideas throughout the country was the key thing. But I also, and I say it's a calling, I had an inspiration that I should personally use my position to mentor several people. And they've become really close friends, and I hope will succeed and be elected themselves someday. But in the meantime, it's great to see them grow, and it enriches me and my job. So my staff even knows that. They say, okay, you're spending a lot of these time with these folks, but we get it, what you're doing. And watching the next generation from my position is so rewarding because they're passionate, they're believers, they're skilled, they want to give back, they want to see our country succeed. And if I can do a little bit to help them in their careers in doing that, then I view it as institutionalizing in a way what I stand for, what I believe in. So when I retire, they can carry on and do the work themselves.
That's awesome. Huge thank you to you, David, for joining me today. Your story reminds us that institutions outlast individuals. Networks are the true currency of influence. And thinking about how to really master the kind of joining of procedure and process can be strategy in itself when paired with real pragmatism and principle. Your leadership has shown how to build for the long term, nurturing relationships, mastering the details of process, and has really helped me, even as a person who has walked paths as a leader of an organization, reflect both on the ways I've shown up, but then also how I can continue to show up in the future. So thank you for your time today and all that you've done.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you very much. If you've enjoyed this episode, please leave a rating and a review and share it with someone who you think would find it valuable. We've got more incredible guests coming this season, so be sure to subscribe to Catalysts for Change wherever you get your podcasts, or visit us at catalystforchangepod.com. Thank you again for listening to Catalysts for Change, brought to you in part by the Southern Research Collaborative. Until next time, I'm Adam Lister, and I'll see you soon.